According to Wikipedia, typology in Christian theology and in biblical exegesis is a doctrine or theory concerning the relationship of the Old Testament to the New Testament. Typology is very useful for grasping truths about the Catholic faith, because it is both at the same time simple and profound. Through typology, people, places, and events from the Old Testament are seen as a foreshadowing or a prefigurement of people, places, and events in the New Testament. Typology uses storytelling to deepen our understanding about the Catholic faith. And this is much like the approach that our Lord took to explaining truth, as he spoke in parables and in stories so that everyone could understand. Please listen prayerfully and open your hearts to see the typological prefigurements that lie waiting for us in the Old Testament. Before we examine how Charlemagne was prefigured in the Old Testament by King David, I would like to offer an idea. The Old Testament contains the entire history of the Israelites. The Israelites were the Old Testament people of God. Their entire history, from their inception until their ending, is completely contained in the books of the Old Testament. Similarly, the New Testament is the entire history of the new people of God, the Catholic Church. The New Testament really contains our history from start to finish. However, the difference is that for the Israelites, their history is entirely recorded in the Bible. Our history is still being lived out. We are still in the New Testament, even though our history is not recorded entirely in the Bible. With that concept in mind, it becomes clear why Charlemagne would be prefigured in the pages of the Old Testament. If the Old prefigures the New, then events in the history of the Church would be prefigured by the Old Testament. It's not just people, places, and events from the pages of the books of the New Testament, but the actual history of our Church that comprises the actual New Testament. Now we are ready to look at how Charlemagne is prefigured in the Old Testament by the life and events surrounding King David. David is a central figure in the history of the Israelites in the Old Testament. His life, his military conquests, his love for the covenant, and bravery set the stage for the history of Israel until the end of the Old Testament. The Psalms that he loved became central to the worship of God by the Israelites. His dynastic succession of Davidic kings, some good and some bad, guarded and ruled over the Old Testament people of God all the way until its dissolution by the great conqueror Nebuchadnezzar. Because most of the stories of David are fairly well known, and for the sake of brevity, only the stories of King David that are relevant to this video will be examined. King David was a boy when he was first anointed king of Israel. He was called in from the fields where he was shepherding, and Samuel the prophet anointed him king. At that time, there currently was another king of Israel, King Saul. However, King Saul was rejected by God because he didn't follow the Lord's commands. Later on, David was anointed again, this time king of Judah. It's worth noting also that Judah is the tribe where Jerusalem was located, and it was the future site of the temple. Judah became the religious capital of Israel. And finally, David was anointed a third time as king over all of Israel. From the first book of Samuel, chapter 16, verses 1 to 3 and verses 11 to 13. And the Lord said to Samuel, How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, whom I have rejected from reigning over Israel? Fill thy horn with oil, and come, that I may send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. And Samuel said, How shall I go? For Saul will hear of it, and he will kill me. And the Lord said, Thou shalt take with thee a calf of the herd, and thou shalt say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. And thou shalt call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show him thee who art to do, and thou shalt anoint him whom I shall show thee. And Samuel said to Jesse, Are here all thy sons? And he answered, There remaineth yet a young one, who keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. He sent therefore, and brought him. Now he was ruddy and beautiful to behold, and of a comely face. And the Lord said, Arise and anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil, and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. And from the second book of Samuel, chapter 2, verses 1 to 4. And after these things David consulted the Lord, saying, Shall I go up into one of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, Go up. And David said, Whither shall I go? And he answered him, Into Hebron. So David went up, and his two wives, Achinoam and Jezreelites, and Abigail the wife of Nabal of Carmel. And the men also that were with him, David brought up every man with his household, and they abode in the towns of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and anointed David there to be king over the house of Judah. And finally, from the second book of Samuel, chapter 5, verses 1 to 3. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, Behold, we are your bone and flesh. In times past, when Saul was our king over us, it was you who led us out and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to you, You shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David's immense popularity with the people originally came from his act of great valor, in which he won an extremely unlikely victory over the giant Goliath. It was this victory, along with others, that made him a hero of the people and propelled him towards the throne of Israel. From the first book of Samuel, chapter 8, verses 6 to 8. Now when David returned, after he slew the Philistine, the women came up out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with timbrels of joy and cornets. And the women sung as they played, and they said, Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was exceedingly angry, and this word was displeasing in his eyes, and he said, They have given David 10,000s, and to me they have given but 1,000. What can he have more but the kingdom? King David was a man of great bravery and a military genius. He won battle after battle against the enemies of Israel. He greatly expanded the territory of Israel and united all the Israelites into one great kingdom. Here are just some of David's victories. A complete list would be too long to include. From the second book of Samuel, chapter 8, verses 1 to 6. While David was king of Israel, he won many battles over the Philistines. He brought them under his control. He took Metheg Ammah away from them. David also won the battle over the people of Moab. He made them lie down on the ground, and then he measured them off with a piece of rope. He put 2/3 of them to death. He let the other third remain alive. So the Moabites were brought under David's rule. They gave him the gifts he required them to bring him. David fought against Hadadezer, the son of Rehob. Hadadezer was king of Zobah. He had gone to repair his monument at the Euphrates River, and David captured 1,000 of Hadadezer's chariots, 7,000 chariot riders, and 20,000 soldiers on foot. He cut the legs of all but 100 of the chariot horses. The Arameans of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, the king of Zobah, but David struck down 22,000 of them. He stationed some soldiers in the Aramean kingdom of Damascus. The people of Aram were brought under his rule. They gave him gifts that he required them to bring him. The Lord helped David win his battles everywhere he went. God promised David that his descendants would reign forever. Our Lord is a descendant of King David, and our Lord will reign forever. However, in the history of the Old Testament, the Davidic kingdom ruled over the territory of Israel, all the way until the kingdom was abolished completely by Nebuchadnezzar. And when the days shall be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will raise up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. And he shall build a house to my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And if he commit any iniquity, I shall correct him with the rod of men, and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy I will not take away from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed before my face. And thy house shall be faithful, and thy kingdom forever before thy face, and thy throne shall be firm forever. David's great sin was that of adultery with Bathsheba, and the subsequent murder of her husband. David also had many wives and concubines during his life. Because of the sin that David committed with Bathsheba, God punished David by causing the sword of violence to never depart from his house. From the second book of Samuel, chapter 11, verses 2-5. In the meantime, it happened that David arose from his bed after noon, and walked upon the roof of the king's house. And he saw from the roof of his house a woman washing herself over against him, and the woman was very beautiful. And the king sent and inquired who the woman was, and it was told him that she was Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Urias the Hittite. And David sent messengers and took her, and she came in to him, and he slept with her, and presently she was purified from her uncleanness. And she returned to her house, having conceived, and she sent and told David and said, I have conceived. The punishment for David's sin with Bathsheba was that David's house would be beset by violence. Indeed, later on, David's son, Absalom, starts a revolt against his father. David is able to put down the rebellion of Absalom. From the second book of Samuel, chapter 15, verses 10-12. And Absalom sent spies into all the tribes of Israel, saying, As soon as you shall hear the sound of the trumpet, say ye, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. Now there went with Absalom 200 men out of Jerusalem that were called, going with simplicity of heart, and not knowing of the design. Absalom also sent for Achitophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city of Gilo. And while he was offering sacrifices, there was a strong conspiracy, and the people running together increased with Absalom. It is also well known that David loved holy music. Many of the Psalms are accredited to King David. The Psalms became the great, holy musical tradition of Israel and were used in their liturgies throughout their history. From the first book of Samuel, chapter 16, verses 23. David took his harp and played with his hand, and Saul was refreshed and was better, for the evil spirit departed from him. And also from Wikipedia, 73 of the 150 Psalms in the Bible are attributed to King David. One of the Dead Sea Scrolls attributes 3,600 Tehillim, songs of praise, plus another composition to him. Some of the titles given to the Psalms in their ascriptions suggest their use in worship. Psalms are used throughout traditional Jewish worship. And it's worth noting that modern scholars see no hard evidence that David wrote any of the Psalms. However, whether he wrote any of the Psalms or not, his name will be forever associated with them. David's daughter, Tamar, was raped by her half-brother Amnon. Tamar requested that Amnon ask King David if he could marry her, so as to make Amnon's sexual act legal. However, Amnon refused and raped her, bringing shame upon her. King David did nothing about his daughter's situation. It was her brother Absalom who took pity on her and let her live with him to cover her shame. From the second book of Samuel, chapter 13, verses 1 and verses 11 through 14. And it came to pass after this, that Amnon, the son of David, loved the sister of Absalom, the son of David, who was very beautiful, and her name was Tamar. And when she had presented him the meat, he took hold of her and said, "Come lie with me, my sister." She answered him, "Do not so, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing must be done in Israel. Do not thou this folly. For I shall not be able to bear my shame, and thou shalt be as one of the fools in Israel. But rather, speak to the king, and he will not deny me to you." But he would not hearken to her prayers, but being stronger overpowered her and laid with her. Now that we have the Old Testament account of King David in place, we can move on to the accounts in the New Testament of Charlemagne. Charlemagne is a majestic figure in the history of the Catholic Church, as he founded the Holy Roman Empire. A thorough analysis of his life would be too long for this video, so only the elements of his life that are relevant to this video will be examined. Charlemagne was crowned 3 times. When he was very young, he was crowned King of the Franks. Later he was crowned King of the Lombards, which was the tribe and area that occupied the large part of Italy, including the city of Rome. Finally, in the year 800, he was crowned Holy Roman Emperor by Pope Leo III on Christmas Day. By many accounts, and including Charlemagne's, he was unaware that he was going to be crowned, and it was a surprise to him. Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Emperor when there already was an empress in Constantinople. Charlemagne was king of the Franks. He united a large part of Europe during the early Middle Ages and laid the foundation for modern France, Germany, and the Low Countries. He took the Frankish throne in 768 and became King of Italy in 774. In 800, he became the first Holy Roman Emperor. Charlemagne was the oldest son of Pepin the Short of Bertrada of Leon. He became king in 768 following the death of his father, initially as co-ruler with his brother Charlemagne I. Charlemagne's sudden death in 771, under unexplained circumstances, left Charlemagne as the undisputed ruler of the Frankish kingdom. Charlemagne continued his father's policy towards the papacy and became its protector, removing the Lombards from power in northern Italy. Charles, unusually, had himself crowned with the Iron Crown, and made the magnates of Lombardy do homage to him at Pavia. Only Duke Aureus II of Benevento refused to submit and proclaimed independence. Charlemagne was then master of Italy as King of the Lombards. At Mass on Christmas Day, when Charlemagne knelt at the altar to pray, the Pope crowned him Imperator Romanorum, Emperor of the Romans, in St. Peter's Basilica. In doing so, the Pope effectively nullified the legitimacy of Empress Irene of Constantinople. Historians have debated for centuries whether Charlemagne was aware before the coronation of the Pope's intention to crown him emperor. Charlemagne declared that he would not have entered St. Peter's had he known, according to the 28th chapter of Einhard's Vita Caroli Magni. Charlemagne was the grandson of Charles Martel, the great hero of Europe, who stopped the Muslim invasion in 732 at the Battle of Tours. Charles Martel won a battle against great odds. His fame made it possible for Charlemagne to gain his throne over Europe. For a detailed look at this battle, and how it was prefigured by the Battle of David and Goliath, along with the effects of the victory in both Israel and Christian Europe, click on the video link below. He was named Karl, Charles in French and English, Carlos in Latin, after his grandfather Charles Martel. Charlemagne was a great conqueror of Europe. He led campaigns that expanded his empire into Italy, in the south of Europe and eastwards. Wherever he went, he established the Catholic faith. He united Europe with the true faith and under one great ruler. The narratives of Charlemagne's conquests are too extensive to include here. Hopefully this list will suffice to serve as evidence. Charlemagne was the first and great king of the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman emperors throughout the whole history of Europe were direct descendants of Charlemagne and ruled over the empire until the last Holy Roman Emperor, Francis II, who was deposed by Napoleon on August 6, 1806. Charlemagne has been called the father of Europe, and he united most of Western Europe for the first time since the Roman Empire. His rule spurred the Carolingian Renaissance, a period of energetic cultural and intellectual activity within the Western Church. All Holy Roman emperors up to the last emperor Francis II, as well as both the French and German monarchies, considered their kingdoms to be descendants of Charlemagne's empire. In the Middle Ages, Charlemagne thought of himself and was viewed by his court scholars as a new David. This was not in itself a new idea, but one whose content and significance were greatly enlarged by him. Charlemagne was the great protector of the church and promoter of the faith. However, he had a problem with sexual purity, as he had many mistresses and concubines. Charlemagne had 18 children over the course of his life, with 8 of his 10 known wives or concubines. Nonetheless, he only had 4 legitimate grandsons and 4 sons of his 4th son Louis. In addition, he had a grandson, Bernard of Italy, the only son of his 3rd son Pepin of Italy, who was born illegitimate but included in the line of his inheritance. One of Charlemagne's sons, Pepin, conspired against Charlemagne to overthrow him from power. Charlemagne successfully put down the coup attempt and banished Pepin to exile. Pepin, or Pippin, the Hunchback, was the eldest son of Charlemagne. In 792, Pepin the Hunchback revolted against his father with a group of leading Frankish nobles. But the plot was discovered and put down before the conspiracy could be put into action. Charlemagne commuted Pepin's death sentence, having him tonsured and exiled to the monastery of Prune instead. Charlemagne and his Holy Roman Empire's descendants were the great developers and promoters of Gregorian chant in Europe. Gregorian chant became the music of the heart of the Roman Mass, and the great musical tradition that was passed down in the Latin Rite throughout the history of the Church. Gregorian chant is the central tradition of Western plain chant, a form of monophonic, unaccompanied sacred song of the Western Roman Catholic Church. Gregorian chant developed mainly in Western and Central Europe during the 9th and 10th centuries, with later additions and redactions. Although popular legend credits Pope St. Gregory the Great with inventing Gregorian chant, scholars believe that it arose from a later Carolingian synthesis of Roman chant and Gaelic chant. Carolingian monarchs also compiled the core liturgy of the Roman Mass and promoted its use in Francia and throughout Gaul. Gregorian chant appeared in a remarkably uniform state across Europe within a short time. Charlemagne, once elevated to Holy Roman Emperor, aggressively spread Gregorian chant throughout his empire. Finally, Charlemagne is thought to have prohibited his daughters from marrying. Instead, he looked the other way while they had extramarital affairs with men, and even bore children out of wedlock. Charlemagne's son, Pepin the Pious, banished his sisters to a convent when he took the throne, as he was concerned with the sexual purity of his sisters. Like her sisters, Bertha never formally married. It has been speculated that Charlemagne did not want his daughters married for strategic reasons, fearing political rivalry from his potential husbands. Bertha was in a long relationship with Engelbert, a court official, which produced 2 children. Following the death of Charlemagne, his successor Louis the Pious exiled his sisters to the convents that had been left for their inheritance by their father. With the Old Testament stories of King David and the New Testament stories of Charlemagne accounted for, we are ready to see how Emperor Charlemagne was prefigured by King David. King David didn't know that Samuel was going to anoint him king until it happened. When David was anointed king by Samuel, King Saul was already the reigning king. David was first anointed king by Samuel, then anointed king of Judah, and finally anointed king of all of Israel. Charlemagne didn't know that Pope Leo III was going to crown him emperor until it happened. When Charlemagne was crowned emperor, Empress Irene was already reigning from Constantinople. Charlemagne was first crowned king of the Franks, then crowned king of the Lombards in Italy, and finally he was crowned Holy Roman Emperor. David was the great hero to the Israelites because of the famous victory he had over Goliath. His fame eventually led to the people rallying behind him, and he started a new line of kings in Israel, the Davidic dynasty. Charlemagne's grandfather, Charles Martel, was the great hero of Europe because he won a very unlikely victory over the Muslims at the Battle of Tours, and he saved Europe from further Islamic invasion. His fame eventually led to his son and grandson to become the first in a new line of European kings, the Carolingians. King David greatly expanded the kingdom of Israel by all his battles and conquests. He defeated many of the enemies of Israel and established dominance. He upheld the covenant and promoted worship of the true God. Charlemagne greatly expanded the Holy Roman Empire by his battles and conquests. He defeated and converted many of the Aryan barbarian tribes and established dominance of almost all of Europe. He promoted the Catholic faith in all his lands. King David was promised by God that his kingdom would endure. From David came all the rest of the kings of Israel, and then of Judah all the way up until the end of the Davidic kingdom, when Nebuchadnezzar abolished the kingdom during the Babylonian exile. Charlemagne's descendants ruled the Holy Roman Empire all the way up until its eventual end in 1806, when Napoleon deposed the last of the Holy Roman Emperors, Francis II. David was described as a man after God's own heart. However, his great sin was committing adultery with Bathsheba, then having her husband killed. David also had many wives and concubines, as well as illegitimate children. Charlemagne was a true son of the church and submitted to her authority. However, Charlemagne also had many wives and mistresses, as well as illegitimate children. David's son Absalom revolted against him and plotted to overthrow his kingdom. David was able to stop Absalom and retain control. Charlemagne's oldest son Pepin also plotted to overthrow his father's empire. Charlemagne discovered the plot and sent Pepin away into exile, retaining control of his empire. David is credited with composing some of the Psalms, although it can't be proven. David played a harp and loved music, especially to glorify God. The Psalms served as the central liturgical musical tradition for the entire history of the Israelites. The Carolingian kings were the great shapers and promoters of Gregorian chant throughout all of Europe. Gregorian chant served as the central liturgical musical tradition for the entire history of the Roman Catholic Church. King David's daughter, Tamar, was denied the offer for marriage and then forced into a sexual relationship. David, her father, didn't do anything about the forced relationship. It was her brother Absalom that took her in and covered her shame. Charlemagne didn't allow his daughters to marry, but instead he allowed them to engage in adultery. At the death of Charlemagne, the brother of the daughters of Charlemagne, Pepin the Pious, covered the shame of his sisters by sending them to convents to live out the rest of their days.